What's up guys, Cody York here, back with another editing tutorial for you. Today we're gonna go over editing our star trail photos. But before we do that, I wanna show you something I use on every time I edit a photo. That's this Wacom Stylist tablet. And I use these because it helps me to make better selections. And also when I'm doing masking, it's more precise and has pressure control. So we're gonna use a little bit of that today, but you can find these on B&H. They're usually $99, but most of the time they have them on sale for this small one. Let's see, this is the Intuos, and I believe it's the extra small, but it's perfect. It's portable, you can travel with it. It's wireless, Bluetooth, so I keep it with me everywhere I go. All right, well, we'll dive in, let's do it. So the first thing we wanna do, like I say with every editing tutorial, is that once you've gone out into the field, you've taken all your photos, when you get back to your computer, the first thing you wanna do is plug your card reader in or your card into your computer, and you're gonna download all those files to your desktop. Now, I know that a lot of you out there like to save your files somewhere else, so do I. I use Dropbox Online and I put everything on there. I keep this laptop free so that it's not bogged down. I keep everything remote or on external. So if you're like that, I get it, but on your current projects, what I do is I keep them on my desktop, whether that's commercial projects or landscape, and then I edit those from the local drive. That way it's just working faster. The computer, the software has an easier time finding that data. It just transfers quicker. If you have it on an external, it works too, but it's gonna be a little slower, so keep that in mind. I usually just try to keep it, you'll see right here on my desktop are the current projects I'm working on, and then when I'm done with those, I move them. Sometimes I do go revisit or re-edit older photos, and that's okay. You can then pull it from the drive, but to begin with, this will be a lot better. So I've already done that process. I've already gone out into the field. I've shot these star trail photos. The photos we'll be editing today are from White Pocket, and I'm gonna show you how to put all those together, but I would then open the card reader. I would drag all those files onto this folder. I've done that already in Southwest Trip Fall. And then from there, we would open up Lightroom Classic and we would go to the library module where we would import them. I've done that already, but when you hit import, you're gonna see this dialog box. You can choose the hard drive, the local drive that we're on. Users, in my case, would be Cody York, and then they would be here, desktop, Southwest Trip Fall. When you select it, it would all show up here under new photos. I hit to add them into my catalog. I don't want to copy as a DNG. Some people, if you want to do that, that's fine. If you know what you're doing, I recommend to add them as new. And then we're gonna go ahead and hit what would be the import dialog button right here. It's grayed out because I've already done that, so I'm gonna hit done. But once they've already loaded, they would show you up here in this bar. They would go all the way until it's loaded, and then all your files would be sitting here. So in this case, I kind of subdivided it into subfolders, but I'm gonna show you a shot from South Coyote Buttes and the teepees area, or a section we call the teepees. And I've already kind of gone and made some selections, but what I would do is kind of scan through all the shots that I took, and then I'm gonna find the ones that I wanna use. In this case, I've got them right here, and I would put a P on them to mark them with a flag. So I've already done that. You can see that highlighted right here on the screen. And then as I put a P for pick, it would then put a flag and then auto advance to the next. So here's some sky images of the star trails. As you can see as I go by, you'll see the stars moving because we did these exposures over 30 seconds in time. And then I've selected all those. From there, you can see I'll shift click on a Mac, and that's gonna show me that there are 15 total. That's what I took in the field. Let's see, our settings were ISO 1600, f5.6, and I think this ended up being 239 seconds, so it was like let's see, 120, 240, it was almost a 5-minute exposure per shot. And this way, the reason we did this without getting too into the shooting side of it was so that we had less files in the end to do these star trails, so we didn't have to edit so many, and then the computer also didn't have to have all this data to process when it got into Photoshop. So I'm gonna take these 15 photos of the sky, and then I'm gonna edit those, do an edit to the sky images. So the first thing I would do here is go into Develop module, and I like to play with the white balance, because as you can see straight out of camera, The white balance is a bit warm, it's in daylight. I probably had it on auto white balance. I try to set it in the field to about 3,800 Kelvin if I can. But if not, I know I can change it later in editing, so that's what I'm gonna do here. So I'm gonna cool this down. The night sky is usually around 3,800 Kelvin. And then also, I like to have it more on the magenta side. There's a bit of green air glow in the sky here on the horizon line, that's okay. But it's got enough magenta up here, so it has a nice even balance. I'll probably leave it around 14. The histogram is leaning a bit heavy into the darks, which is normal, it's natural because it's a night sky shot, but I might boost the exposure just a little bit and bring that up. Traditionally, we want to have that histogram kind of breach in the highlights to about the halfway point, similar to what we do with the Milky Way. And then from there, I want to boost the stars. So I'm going to want to make those stars brighter in those nebulas, so I'm going to increase the whites without clipping on the histogram or losing any of that data, and then kind of zoom in here, kind of bring it up a bit without bringing out too much of that noise in the image. And then from there, we're going to scroll down. I'm not going to play with vibrance or saturation. The way that I like to enhance color is more into the camera's data, into the files data, and increase the primary channels, so red, green, and blue. I'm gonna boost these here. Again, like I've said in previous videos, these numbers aren't exact, so it's not gonna work every time for every file. It has to be the precise same number. It's a general feel, but roughly I start with 5. I use the plus minus keys on the keyboard to increase or decrease these in increments of 5. But I would say that around 5 or 10 generally, we don't got it too heavy with the color, but that should look pretty nice. And then that's about where I like it visually, just looking at this at a glance to start. Before we end up doing this blend, this exposure blend with the foreground, we might change the colors a bit more in Photoshop, but for now I'm gonna leave it there. And let's see, we're gonna shift click all the way to the last 15th photo we have of the sky. And I'm gonna sync that. And we're gonna choose all the things we did and we're gonna sync it. Now, in doing this, I realized there's one thing I forgot to do, so let's go back to that first file. I didn't touch base on lens correction. So by default, it turned on chromatic aberration, which we wanna get rid of. And then it also turned on enable profile corrections, which is great. We're shooting with a wide angle lens. It's gonna cause some distortion. It's gonna cause some natural vignetting. I wish it was better software in that when it corrected the distortion, it didn't have this banding. But right now with distortion correction turned on, you can see that we kind of get this banding in the corners of the image. And on the Milky Way photos, if you've seen prior videos, I've shown it better. But there's kind of some weird haloing kind of banding that goes on in here. So we want to take the distortion correction off, but we want to keep the vignetting correction on. So I'll show you before and after on that. So it's gotten rid of that vignetting, which we like, but it hasn't corrected the distortion, which we don't like. So we're going to go ahead and leave that. And again, I'm going to shift click, select all those sky images and sync that now, so it also adds in that lens correction here, which I had selected, but I didn't make those changes. I'm gonna hit sync. All right, so you can quickly see that it did that. It applied it to all the photos. We're gonna go through, quick glance, they're all the same. All right, so our sky images are ready to go. They're ready to be exported to Lightroom and then stacked. But before we get there, I want to show you the foreground file that we took, that photo, and we want to match it because we're going to have to exposure blend the two of these files. We want them to look similar in nature with color, tone, exposure, etc., because we're going to have to blend these together in post-production to make it look correct. So I'm going to skip over here. You see I've already made my selection on my foreground. I left the camera on a tripod. It didn't move at all. This is from the same exposure as my sky. So naturally, technically, they should line up as far as the horizon goes or be almost perfect. So let's go here. And I could quickly try to take one of these sky images and transfer it over. And if I did that, let's see what we would get. It's a good starting point. It cooled it down, pretty much what I would have done anyways. It is a bit brighter in the sky. So as far as blending goes, we're clipping on the histogram here and the highlights down in the horizon line. So I would go up to the exposure and I would probably bring down some of these highlights a little bit. Might bring the exposure back down just to darken it. But I do want to have more detail in this shadowy area, in these blacks, in these shadows. So I'm going to boost the shadows quite a bit to show some detail there without bringing out too much that we're introducing more noise. Because you're going to get a lot of your noise is going to come in your dark blacks and your shadows. Because if you're clipping that area, there's no information there. So let's go ahead here and take a look. That looks pretty good. And then we're gonna go ahead and keep the calibration on because we like that color that it's boosting there. That looks pretty good. We're still clipping a little bit, so I might bring down the highlights. That's still clipping. Let's see here. So exposure is right about there. We wanna keep it a tad bit on the darker side because again, this is the night sky. We're blending this to the night sky. This foreground photo, if you remember being out in the field, we shot this at blue hour. So it was a bit brighter. There was a lot more atmosphere light. So we have to tone that down and still work with a night sky image to be proper. Okay, so that generally looks pretty good. So from there, I'm gonna go back to the sky images. I'm gonna select all these and I'm gonna hit Control click on a Mac and I'm gonna hit to edit in, and we're gonna hit open as layers in Photoshop. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. It'll take a minute to process. So we're in Photoshop, it's opened all those sky images, it's put them in order here over here in the layers panel. And what we're gonna do is go ahead and shift click on a Mac, all these layers so that they're selected. And then this is where the magic happens. A lot of people think that star trail blending is very complex, and in some way it could be, but thankfully for Photoshop we have blending modes. And if you go down here to lighten, it's gonna change the blend of each layer and how they interact. And therefore it's only gonna allow those bright areas of the photo to come through, in this case, the stars. And so what you see here is all the star movements from each frame, which creates our star trails. So I'm gonna hit lighten, and now we have our star trails, our sky image. Now, there are a lot of planes that flew through while we were taking these interval shots. So what I'm gonna show you next is how to get rid of those plane shots. And I'm also seeing some gaps here in the stars in some of the timeline here. So I'll have to find out what those are. If I have other images that we're taking at different times, then I'm gonna have to get rid of those. So in order to do that, what I'm gonna do is turn all these layers off, going up to the top layer. We're gonna add it one by one. So we start with this first frame. I'm gonna Command minus to zoom out here on a Mac. And then I'm gonna slowly start turning these on. And let's see if the stars stay together or if there's creating much gaps to them. So I'm gonna undo. So we already have a gap there. So I'm gonna get rid of that first photo and not use it. I'm gonna start the second one. Now these stayed together. As you can see in here, the stars are touching. They stayed together, so maybe that first file was not supposed to be in the mix. So therefore, I'm just gonna turn it off. I don't have to use it. So I'm going back here. I'm looking on the layers panel. I've only have 3 photos turned on that are showing. I'm gonna keep going down and just make sure that I like all the stars, that they're cleanly connected and they're streaking how we want them. Let's see here. Turn these on, these are all good. I'm just gonna go a little quicker for the sake of time. Yeah, and I think it was just that beginning file was probably not the one I want to put in there. So those all look clean, they all look together. All right, so let's just go ahead and delete this layer out of here so we don't get confused. Now again, to get rid of all of these planes that have flown through, I'm gonna go back and turn all the layers off again. We're gonna turn on that first layer. Now, layer by layer, I'm gonna look to see if a plane has gone through it. So in this case, zoomed out, I didn't see any, but zooming in at 100%, which is Command plus on a Mac, I am still not seeing any. This is a shooting star right here. So I like that, I'm gonna leave it. but I don't see any other plane trails coming through here. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn on the next layer. And the same thing, I'm gonna scan around and find out where there are some planes that have come through. Still don't see any, that's good. I'm gonna zoom out, just get a overall visual here. And then turn on another layer. All right, so there's our first one being introduced. You can see these red dashes down here from the airplane lights. I'm gonna zoom in, and here's how we get rid of that. We're gonna go to the actual layer where the planes is on, which is this one. I'm turning it on and off. You can see it coming through here. And then I'm gonna add a mask to it. So the mask is gonna hide, it's gonna conceal or reveal the layer that you're on and the layer that's behind it, in this case, this top layer. All right, so what we wanna do here is select the mask to create a mask. It's gonna reveal this layer, but we want to show the layer behind it because it doesn't have star trails and no spots. So I'm gonna use my Wacom tablet. I'm gonna go over here and I'm gonna hit the letter B on the keyboard to use a brush. And in this case, it's set to 19%. I'm gonna turn the opacity all the way up to 100, the flow to 100. And then while selected on this mask, that's key, you're gonna wanna go in here and then you're just gonna paint out these trails here. Now it's showing the layer underneath it. And in this case, it's not gonna be removing anything. You get a little bit of a color change, but that's okay. It'll blend in later. And it took away some of this star because of the one below it didn't have it. So I'm gonna hit X to bring some of that back, and I'm slowly just gonna paint some of that trail back. And you can see it right there. So then I'm gonna hit X to switch it. And when I hit X, it's changing from black to white, what we're painting with. All right, I'm gonna go back to the black here, and I'm gonna continue to paint out these little dashes. That cleaned out one of the plane trails. So a little discoloration, but that'll blend in once we add more layers. So I'm gonna go over here on the layers panel, and I'm gonna keep going down these shots one by one. So now once we've taken out all the planes in each of these images, what we wanna do is make sure that we're happy with it all. And I may zoom in, kind of look around, make sure we got all the planes, any light pollution that's chemtrails that are there. And then if there's any little specks here, we can clean up little dead pixels or hot pixels. We'll get to that in a minute. I'm gonna zoom out. Command 0 on a Mac will zoom it out to full frame. And then from there, we have all these files now. So this file is gonna be massive by the time we're done editing. And we're gonna bring in the foreground image and we're gonna composite that with an exposure blend. So this is gonna build a lot of data. So what we wanna do is if we're happy with this, I'm gonna go ahead and merge visible on all this so it condenses it and compresses it down to one file. If you like to work in layers and you wanna go back and change something, or you're worried you might have forgotten something or didn't get everything, then you can leave it intact. But for this sake, I'm gonna merge visible. And now we have one layer here to work on. That being said, this is where I would go in and go ahead and clean up any of these extra pixels. So we have hot pixels. You can go in here to the healing brush. I'm gonna minimize the brush size here on this spot healing brush. And then I can go in here and pick out any of these little hot pixels or dust or any of the noise that you don't like. But generally, that looks pretty good. Some of these little ones that kind of stand out, I don't like, I will correct. That looks pretty good, okay. So back out to full frame. So this is our sky image. It's pretty much ready to go to be blended with our foreground. Before we go back into Lightroom and get our foreground image, we want to save this back into Lightroom. That way we can bring both of those files back into Photoshop together to exposure blend them. And that's how you're gonna do this. You can, if you have Lightroom open, you can just hit File Save or Command S on a Mac, and it's now saved this back. It's saving it back to Lightroom. I've already done that, so I'm gonna cancel, but I'll show you where that's at. It comes back into Lightroom, and it's right here. Here's the blended sky image of all the star trails, and then here's our foreground file. We have both of them. This is the one we retouched a little bit earlier. So now I'm gonna command click on these two files on a Mac, edit, open as layers in Photoshop, and it's just gonna put these over top of each other. That way you don't have to free transform and make sure you line them up properly. They'll come in together, lined up as they should. So I'll show you that by turning the top layer off, which is the sky. As you can see, because we've matched them as far as how we edited them with the transform and with the lens corrections, and by taking the distortion off of both of these, they're gonna be proportionally the same. And that's something to remember. You don't wanna be editing your foreground and your sky images. One you corrected the distortion for, the other you didn't, because it's gonna warp the file, and the other is not gonna be warped, and therefore they're not gonna line up correctly. So just make sure you're aware of that. But we did that right, so they should match up. From here, now is the challenging part where we need to exposure blend this. Now, the sky image is both dark on the top and the bottom, so getting a nice clean selection would be a little more challenging. So I'm gonna go ahead and use the foreground image to select out the sky and then to bring into the star trails behind it. So therefore, I'm gonna put this foreground image on top. And then there's several ways you can get a mask. You can use luminosity masking, you can use the quick selection tool, you can use all sorts of things. You can, let me see here. I like to just start with quick selection tool. Let me find that, it's right up here in the toolbar. And then increasing the size of the tool. Let me see here with the bracket keys, make it larger. I'm gonna go in here. And you're just gonna click and drag on this. Let's see if we can get much of the sky selected. Now it's going on tonality, color, a number of things, but it's recognizing the contrast in the scene and deciding like, I think this is sky versus foreground. And it's done a really good job. All right. So I'd further refine this by doing a series of selection modifying. So in this case, what I like to do is to expand it by 1 pixel. Then I like to also smooth it. We'll do 1 pixel, and then feather. And then usually 0.5. Hit OK. So that's just refine the selection just to make it a little cleaner, a little easier to blend in with the other layer. So from there, move this dialog box out of the way. All this new AI technology they want us to use. And then we're gonna hit layer mask. I'm gonna invert that. It's Command I on the Mac. And as you can see, it just blended those two. Here's our mask down here, and it brought our sky in with our foreground. And just off the bat, relatively, because we kind of made the color balance the same, it looks like a natural scene and it works here. I'll zoom in, and you can see on our layers, on our blend, because we have a very rough edge here that's very clean and sharp, the selection didn't have much of a problem getting everything. So there's only one thing I notice is just this brightness over here we can tone down using luminosity masking, but overall, we're in a great spot. So that's how you would do your star trail exposure blend. From there, you can flatten this image, and you can merge visible, and you can save this, or you could leave the layers as is. From here, you could go into more creative editing, burning and dodging, enhancing this in many different ways. We're not going to get into that today, but I would go ahead and just do layer, merge visible, and then Command S would save this back into Lightroom. I've already done it, and then you can see the final edit here, and I'll make that full frame. And that's all it is for doing star trails. Thanks for joining me.